Howdy, welcome to BanjoBenClark.com. I'm Banjo Ben, your host. This teaching using guitar today. We're going to have a lot of fun calling this lesson Building Endings in G. When we're playing bluegrass guitar, we very often find ourselves in the key of G or out of a G position anyway, even when we use a capo. And we also often find ourselves playing songs, and we also find ourselves often having to end those songs and often finding that we need the guitar to end them. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to break down that very basic shave and a haircut ending, and then we're going to begin to add more and more complex things to it so that you can have a handful of good fancy endings to take to your next jam. If you're watching somewhere else beside BanjoBenClark.com, I'd be honored to have you on board. You can join as a Gold Peak member, see thousands of videos now. I've got thousands, something like that. Just come on over and check it out. We're going to start out with a very basic ending, and then we're just going to continue to build. We've got 5 different endings that we're going to build out, but we need to have the skeleton. We need to have the basic frame to what these endings are, and the first one sounds just like this. Now again, we're going to get more complicated than that. We're going to get much more complex, much more fancy, but we got to understand what this basic ending is first, because it's one of those building blocks in bluegrass guitar that you need to have under your belt. Now, what is it? Well, if you start at the very top of the lick, it starts on a G note. We're in the key of G, out of a G position. So we're going to start on a G note, and we're going to work our way down to a G note an octave lower. So these are both G notes, one octave apart. Now, how are we going to get there? Well, we're going to get there using a very particular scale that maybe you've heard of. It's called the Pentatonic Scale, which is 5 notes. The 5 notes are the first, second, third, 5th, and 6th tones of the major scale. That's the pentatonic scale going up. Pentatonic scale going down. That sounds a lot like this, doesn't it? Okay, so many of these licks are built around that pentatonic scale, and we're going to have that, again, as a backbone, as a foundation, a frame to add many, many more fancy things on. So we're going to just walk down the pentatonic scale. And then that second measure there, we are going to introduce a couple of 8th notes. So we're going to do some alternate picking there, down, up, down, down. And then we have the famous shave and a haircut 2 bits that we often hear the banjo play. Dum, ba-da-dum, bum, bum, bum. We're going to do a guitar version of that. Okay, the whole ending slowly. Okay, so that's our basic foundation for what these bluegrass endings are going to be built around. Now what we can do is this. We can start to add more 8th notes. We can bring in blues scales, blues notes. We can begin to add hammer-ons, slides, pull-offs to bring it more and more up in their skill level and complexity. Okay, so let's do that next. We'll look at lick number 2. Let's look at lick number 2. We're going to take that basic foundation, that frame that we've already laid out, and we're going to add some things to it to make it a bit more complex. Let me play the lick for you all the way through. A little faster. A lot more 8th notes happening here, right? And so that means that our alternate picking, our pick direction is more important. You need to pay attention to that with the arrows that are written beneath each one of the notes. Now, of course, we can get much more complex, and we're going to do that in just a moment, more fancy, but this is a lot going on compared to the first lick. And when we're playing some really fast tempos, sometimes we need something that sounds good, has a lot of notes, but doesn't have the hardest skills in them to execute. And this is a great lick to do that at fast speeds. So how is this different from the first lick? That's what I want to talk about really quick. Again, the basic lick sound like this. Almost all of those licks are there in this ending number 2, and almost all in the same spot. There's just other notes around it. And I just have to ask the question, where do I get those notes? How am I filling in the holes? So instead of playing quarter notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and we're going 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and okay, where do I get those notes? Well, the answer is, for this ending, we're getting it just from the major scale. So we're expanding beyond the pentatonic scale, beyond those 5 notes of the major scale. And now all of the notes of the G major scale are available for us to grab in this particular ending. And we're going to use all 7 of them at one time or another through here. Another thing that I'm doing, you'll notice we have a little pickup note. On the end of that first measure, on the last beat of that first measure, we have these 2 notes. Okay? Whereas the first ending just started on the downbeat, we're going to come in on the 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm climbing up to that root. We're still going from this G back down to this G, but this time we're going to use every note in the G major scale to get there, and we're even going to climb up for one note, measure 7. I'm grabbing that with my pinky. Now in the second half of the lick, the basic version sounds like this. And we're actually not going to change the second part. But we are going to change that first part. So instead of doing the basic, we're just going to add some eighth notes to it. But check this out. What am I doing there with the first fret? Is that in the G major scale? It is not. So we're actually going to borrow one note from outside of the G major scale. Which note is that? Well, it's an E flat. It's a flat 6. But more importantly, I think more easily to recognize what's happening here is that I'm going from the second fret on the D string. And at the beginning of measure 10, I want to play an open D string. And I want to just get there. And there's one fret in the way. It's this first fret. So I'm just going to touch on it just to lead the ear from here to there. So the second half of the lick sounds like this. So it doesn't have to theoretically make sense. You know, in that instance, we're pulling from a note that is outside the G major scale. It's one of those kind of more rare blues notes. But it makes sense in that we're going from an E note to a D note. There's a fret in the way, and we're just going to step on it like we would a stepping stone, and it creates a cool sound at the same time. Okay, so that's 2. We've got 3 more to go. They're going to progressively get a bit more complex and difficult, and I think more cool sounding. If you're watching here on the website, just click on lick number 3. If you're watching somewhere else, I'd be honored to have you on board as a gold pick member. Let's continue on.